Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Research America Alliance discussion. My name is Ravi Thadani. I'm the Executive Vice President for Health Affairs at Emory University, and today you're joining the Research America Alliance, which I'm sure many of you have joined before. We are super excited about today's special guest, Dr. Kimryn Rathmell, who's the Director of the NCI at the NIH. We're looking forward to Dr. Rathmell discussing her priorities for the Institute, as well as the current challenges and areas of particular promise, of course, in cancer research. So before we get started, of course, I'm required to remind you, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we'll either get to them as they're relevant for answers that Dr. Rathmell has, or we'll wait until the end. We will end promptly at 12:45, and I'll go ahead and begin, first of all, and thanking Dr. Rathmell for joining us this afternoon, and it's truly an honor to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, as always, Dr. Rathmell, I think most people are quite interested in hearing about your journey, how you got to this place, this incredible place, I would say, to direct the NCI, and kind of big picture about not just your journey, but we'll then, of course, then talk about your plans for the NCI. But maybe let's just start with your journey.
Yeah, glad to. And especially for if there are younger people in the audience, I think it's important to hear how nonlinear all of our journeys are, even though they can seem like they were. You know, I grew up in the Midwest. I went to the University of Northern Iowa with the idea that I was going to go to medical school because I had worked in the nursing home in my town. I had been a certified nursing assistant. I really enjoyed patient care and thinking about the interaction between health and disease. But I didn't really understand what discovery science was until I was invited into a laboratory to study soybeans, by the way, and looked at soybean interaction with sunlight and discovered we could learn things that people didn't know. And that's what got me moving in the direction of incorporating science into medicine. You know, the first part of the path is fairly linear. Got a PhD as well as an MD, I did a research-based set of trainings, but always felt like that my home base was at the intersection between discoveries and making a difference for patients. I became an oncologist because it touched so many parts of medicine, and because you get to be at the front line with your patient throughout their cancer journey. And then I learned that we can make a difference both by making discoveries and being there with patients and being the best providers that we can be, and having a system that works really well. And so that got me into administration. I ended up moving into be a division chief at Vanderbilt for a period of time, and then chaired the Department of Medicine. And there really learned how, and by the way, I did that in January of 2020. So that was an exciting year to be starting in a Department of Medicine, and learned how important it is to be connected to regional healthcare centers and to be able to work with people in both virtual and in-person ways, and how important it was that the structure of a place was to health in a region. And so I went back and did a little bit more school. I went and got my business degree at the Owen School of Management at Vanderbilt. It's a master's of management in healthcare. Learned a ton about budgets and accounting and how to lead complex organizations, and that together, all of those facets, I didn't realize how much that was setting me up to look at the NCI. And this, when the call came to move here, this is the only job I would have moved for. And this has been, the NCI has always been something that I've held in highest regard. I've been an NCI funded investigator for decades, but to be a part of this whole enterprise, which is mission aligned to end cancer as we know it, to use science to improve human health. It's this is every day energizing and inspiring. So I'm really having the time of my life here.
What an incredible journey. And we talk about a peripatetic path and from a CNA to studying soybeans to getting a PhD and then a master's in health administration and such. So quite incredible. And no doubt all of those skill sets have come to bear in this new incredible role that you have. So I appreciate you sharing that journey. And I know we'll come back to some advice for young investigators and physician scientists in particular, which I know you're passionate about, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. But maybe before we get to that, certainly in this new role, relatively new role as the NCI director, Monica is a friend from Boston, and I know when she became the director, she certainly set some priorities and precedent in terms of areas of focus. And I suspect you going into the role, and now Monica being your boss in a way, you probably have a few things to think about in terms of challenges, because a lot of people knocking on your door, right? And a number of different stakeholders, not only Monica, but really the broader community. So I'm curious, how would you stack up some of those key challenges that you think you're going to have to address, or at least feel like you have to address in the ensuing years, big picture, and then of course we can focus on a few of them moving forward.
Yeah. So first, I'll say that having Monica as the NIH director is, a gift no one else can ask for in the NCI, right? To have someone who knows cancer backwards and forwards, who gets it when I bring something to her attention. So, and we also complement each other in really important ways. I of course knew her before, but have really appreciated. She is a surgeon and a more clinical scientist. I was a little more basic and more, I'm a medical oncologist. And so it's been just terrific to work with her. So, I have to put at the top of the list when you think about like what challenges are we facing, number one is funding. We have way more good ideas than we have funding for. This was a really tight budget year in FY24, although there was an increase to our base because at the end of the Cures Act, we actually had our first decrease in overall appropriation of $96 million, but the first decrease in many, many years. And because of the debt ceiling, the FY25 is likely to be a tough year as well. And we have a mandate to continue to move forward. And by the way, plenty of good things to do. So making that balance, that's definitely the number one challenge. Very, very glad I went to business school, but also very glad that I have a team that's very skilled, versed, creative in how we do this. When I think about like what things are my priorities, one part I didn't share in my background is first, my parents were teachers, and education is part of my core. I spent a lot of time first helping to run an MD PhD program, and then later running other training programs spanning residency, postdoctoral training, graduate training, and early career. So that talent development piece is very important to me, and especially fostering the early stage investigators. So we're working very hard to make sure that we're keeping that pipeline very robust. So that means when we had to make tough choices about where we're setting pay lines, we kept the pay line strong for the early stage investigators at 17%, with 10% pay line for the established investigators. I think I also very much value collaborative work. And I talked a little bit about this at ACR, but thinking about how we work in spaces in between known areas. So you break down silos by having people work together in not just sharing ways, but in ways that are truly collaborative and truly synergistic, and looking for those kinds of opportunities. So to me, we see that in how we address clinical work, and how we do some of our basic science studies, where we incorporate data across every single thing that we do. And then how we include advocates and patients and the community. And this will be a part of, how some of the advances that we are currently discovering and implementing really get taken up so that people can benefit the most. We need to make some of this progress faster, and that means that we engage with the community in different ways. So those are the priorities that I'm really championing most.
Yeah, I said, in fact, I was going to go to the next question to think about sort of vision that you will impart. And you mentioned communities. I know certainly a number of other agencies are focusing on that in particular this year. But I guess imparting a vision also requires resources. And you mentioned the budget cut, which is certainly not welcome. And especially in a field like cancer, where you have to be almost totipotent to be able to flex and go in directions just based on where the science is going, and hence sort of the balance in imparting a vision versus being open about being able to go in a different direction.
Right. Yeah. So I think about having values guide a vision and guide our work. I alluded to a couple of my values. I'll be very transparent. I have some values that I am incorporating in most of the decisions that I'm making here today. Number one is talent development. I already mentioned that. To me, that's the early stage investigator, that's trainees, but it's more than that. That is developing people to be able to do, to continue to grow along their continuum, whether this is in the clinical research arena and in translation, or in very fundamental basic science, or in the administration of our work. I also think about a value of creativity and innovation. So this is what brings us all here. This is our, at our heart and soul, but also has to be incorporated into things that we do. So when we're thinking about what we're doing in advancing clinical trials, being able to bring clinical research into the much broader arena, into outside of the academic centers, we have to be creative, right? So I'm really excited about things like the Virtual Clinical Trials Office, which is currently a pilot to test and understand what works and doesn't work, and taking the usual group of personnel that we use to run clinical studies and distributing them virtually, right? So there are parts that work well and parts that don't, and we have to learn how to do that effectively and apply, a creative lens to that kind of work. I also think about a value of empowerment, and that is part of how do you execute a vision, which is having the people on the ground knowing what it is that we need to do, and being proactive and open to communication. So I'm a little more of a bottom up than a top down type of leader. And the other value that I've been ascribing, and it's because of the year that we're in, but really is more than that, is fiscal responsibility. This is taxpayer dollars that we work with, but it's also human lives that we're really charged with improving. I take it really seriously that our mission is to end cancer as we know it, which means a lot of different things. It means eradicating fear from cancer. It means novel therapeutics. It means leaning into the things that are in the National Cancer Plan, preventing cancers, detecting them early, developing effective therapeutics, and providing optimal care. And then building on all that with data-driven solutions, maximizing our data utility, providing equitable care and eliminating inequities, building our workforce. Workforce is going to come up probably in answer to every single question, just to be prepared. And then engaging every person. So, I think these are all related, and it's helped me a lot to use the National Cancer Plan to really push forward the ideas that are most ripe, most likely to be successful in both the short term or the long term.
I'm going to touch on a few things you mentioned. One of the questions I was going to ask you was about equitable access to cancer care and clinical trials. I may just resurrect that question or bring that question up to the top, if you don't mind at the moment, because you touched on this. You touched on the Virtual Clinical Trials Office. You touched on community outreach. My suspicion is that those kinds of efforts and programs allow us to be much more comprehensive in terms of not just participation, but intervention and understanding variation in responses and so forth. Maybe you can just comment on that if you don't mind, Dr. Rathmell.
Yeah, no, not at all. To me, I think that we need to move to an era where clinical studies are a normal part of everyone's care, and that we're learning from every patient, that we can be much more rigorous in being able to risk adapt people, to help people know where they are, so that we can utilize this wide array of therapies that are all here or on the horizon more effectively. I also think about the kind of questions that we're trying to address. We need answers today, and that means that we need to find ways to move forward faster. We just can't be patient when we have this many good ideas and things that can really change outcomes. So and trials are getting more complex, so we have to work together, and we have to be able to be nimble across space and time. So I have a couple of things that we have in the works to try to facilitate that. One is really just getting information and data. So we have a panel of experts that are working together in an ad hoc working group. It's a collaboration with American Cancer Society, with government agencies, to see where there's capacity and how we can bring more patients into clinical trials and be more equitable in terms of access. A big thing that we're interested in is trying to understand where things like social determinants of health, as well as geography and rural America, deserves to have the same level of cancer care that everyone else does. So we're approaching that as scientists, studying it and trying to really understand how to connect underrepresented populations with clinical trials. So it's coming up literally as a theme in almost everything that we do.
Is there anything specific you might want to highlight for us in terms of the access? I know you just mentioned sort of the rural access and the barriers that we face, not just in cancer trials or in cancer studies, but of course in all studies. Is there anything in particular that you're excited about?
Yeah, I'll just give one example. We're going to be working with across the cancer centers to share best practices and help to learn from each other. I just came from the University of Kansas, where they have a really unique consortium of practice groups across the state that work together. They are not co-owned or part of the same health plan. They are independent, but collaborate so that they can offer the best clinical trials across the state. As I look at how we, incentivize this work and how we, align what are our NCI funded trials, sort of limited dollars to be able to, address really fundamentally important questions in cancer care, I think that we need to learn how to do more of that. How to do both informal and formal networks of doctors and providers across the country, and also to think about how we connect into outside of the traditional oncology community. I think our network of NCORE sites, by the way, I'm visiting NCORE sites everywhere that I go, which has just been phenomenal. That's our National Community Oncology Research Program. But a lot of this prevention, early detection, that happens in primary care. So we really need to be more connected into sort of the health fabric of America if we're really going to make a difference for cancer.
Yeah, that's great. I suspect that was a nice visit at Kansas to uncover that. I'm going to go back to a word or words you mentioned, which is sometimes we need answers today, especially in cancer. And I know you have looked closly into this, which is the decrease in cancer rates in many different segments, but the demographic of young adults, we are seeing kind of an increase in rates in a variety of cancers, which is actually quite shocking and troublesome and worrisome on a number of different levels. I suspect it's come up in many of your different visits, as well as thinking about the research that the NCI is focused on, as well as just overall epidemiology and understanding. Share with us your thinking of sort of that increase in rates in young adults that is so troubling.
Yeah, well, I think cancer doesn't stand still. We all know that this disease shifts. I mean, over my own career, we've seen big changes, but this is one that's really dramatic, and it has the attention of the community. That makes it ripe for two reasons to really tackle. One is that people are paying attention, but also, I mean, this is not something we can turn our backs on. When people get cancer in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, even if we're really successful and we can treat and cure them of their cancer, they have a long life ahead, and we have to be ready to manage the the survivorship for these patients, to enable them to be healthy beyond their cancer, and certainly would love to understand how this comes to be. So this, I actually think that this is a perfect space for NCI to take on from multiple different angles, and because there really is a question for everyone, and we need to do this in a coordinated way. This is something that's top line in our discussions of how we do that. We do have RFAs that are out for studies. Actually, those are the first wave or in the cycle of peer review already. And we know that people are working on this. We have a number of sites that are already putting good attention to this area, but we need to do it together. We need to do it in a really coordinated way, because we just can't afford not to. I'm a kidney cancer doctor, and I had a handful of patients who came up with cancer. Actually, I'll tell you one story. One young woman, I was really shocked when she was a clear cell renal cell carcinoma, diagnosed at 22, metastatic disease, widespread bony disease, and we treated her as clear cell for a number of years. And then and we had done genetic testing beginning. We had done genetic testing after 5 years, and we did genetic testing later. And it's not until genetic testing evolved to catch up that we discovered that she actually had a different molecular basis for her tumor than it appreciated before. And she unfortunately passed from her cancer. But had we known about this this mutational variant, it's something that we could have been working on. We are now, of course, and there are other patients like that out there. So I think just even understanding what we're dealing with when we meet these patients is really very important. And the tools were primitive 10 years ago, and today they're much more sophisticated, and they just keep getting better.
Yeah, I suspect, again, going back to something you said, that we're going to be able to tackle this, or the NCI is going to be able to focus on this, if we encourage sort of a collaborative effort behind this, just because I guess maybe the absolute rates are low, but the relative rates are just shocking to a certain extent. And I'm not sure if your RFAs capture sort of the need to collaborate really across the country, or if there are certain segments of the country where you're seeing this more than others.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be something that evolves more over the next couple of years to really be bringing all of the different components together. Everything from biology and implementation science and environmental exposures and the epidemiology of the work, of the disease. It really is going to take attention from everybody. So
Yeah.
look out for that. There's going to be some good work to do.
Well, the NCI has certainly done a terrific job in terms of assembling different cutting edge tools to tackle a problem like cancer. And no doubt cancer, just like every other field, even outside of medicine, are thinking about technology and machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I suspect that's also come on your desk in terms of opportunities to address these kinds of issues.
Yeah, the use of data to answer these kinds of events, had we had some of the data tools that are at our fingertips today, I won't say that they're ready for prime time, but they are, to be able to use real world data. We are learning very rapidly how to do that. Just imagine we might have been aware of this wave much earlier than we are today. And when I think about what we can do with artificial intelligence, it's really truly exciting. I think about what we can do faster when we think about imaging and analytics of tissues. our human tissue atlas network is really just about to explode with data for people to see, and it's taken high-end computing capacity to be able to understand what is going on inside a tumor, so we can think about tumors in ways that we never could before. So yeah, no, AI comes up in our data systems, come up in literally every conversation that I have. It's transforming what we do today, and I'm so excited about what it will do in the near future.
Yeah,
so
it's certainly the case. I know, and everything I know in our own system, from thinking about revenue cycle all the way to how to take care of patients. I mean, it's pretty impressive and overwhelming. And how do we prioritize where we allocate those technologies is important.
But even in sort of support services for busy clinicians, some of the new AI driven algorithms to support decisions about using immunotherapy versus combination chemotherapy. These are really rigorous and very robust, and can change the way we practice even today. So I'm just really excited to see where the data science takes us. It's such a big deal that we brought in another deputy. He just started a month ago. Warren Kibbe joined us in the deputy group as our deputy for data science and strategy, because this is just a big part of every single thing that we do.
That's terrific. Dr. Rathmell, talking about technology, it inherently brings up the question of public-private partnerships. And I'm curious your position on that, as well as where you see there might be opportunities, not just, of course, in AI, but other kinds of partnerships.
Yeah, so AI is one, but really across the board, I think we have to be open to public-private partnerships. There's really good work that happens in the private sector, and we can't get our discoveries really into the hands of patients unless we work very closely with them. I mean, a great example this year is the FDA approval of the first cellular therapy for melanoma. That started from basic science discovery work, but was partnership between Iovance Biotherapeutics and Moffitt Cancer Center and others to do the studies, do them rapidly and effectively, so that this is a therapy that could get out there. And there's so much more coming in the cellular therapy and CAR T world. It is going to have to take good partnerships. We also, of course, invest in early stage companies, like with the SBIR program, the Small Business Innovation Research Program, and that's a very directed way. We support the development of companies to be able to take great discoveries and make them products. This is where the economic engine that the NCI really is, and I really like the Research America report that looks at what the investment gives us. I mean, there is not a better investment that I can imagine, and we have to make products to be able to to benefit patients, and that supports our economy as well. So I think that those partnerships are just invaluable.
Yeah, I mean, and those are exciting, and there are actually case examples where they've yielded some pretty phenomenal results, like the one you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you from the SBIR, I gave myself a couple of comments so that I could kind of pull them up. There's a company that's working on pediatric low-grade gliomas with a very promising drug that we're supporting. But if we look back, we supported Illumina in their early days, right? And that's a company that has really transformed biomedical science through sequencing efforts. So we really love to see those success stories, and I feel like the NCI is literally almost everyone, right? But we're proud too when small companies take off.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let me, if you don't mind, Dr. Rathmell, just check with Jacqueline and see if we have any questions, because I certainly have a few more if we don't. Jacqueline, any questions?
Yes, so thank you, Dr. Rathmell and Dr. Thadani, for wonderful conversation so far. We have a few from the audience, and then if we have time, we can go back to other questions. So Dr. Rathmell, first question, how much basic research should the NCI support and in what focus areas?
Oh, well, you're talking to a basic scientist, so we should support basic research. The things that we're, I'm talking about trying to advance things to, patient care, but they all started with a basic science discovery. So, and you're also talking to a basic scientist who's worked in very fundamental basic molecular biology, signaling, chromatin, cell division, and immunology. So I think that, and metabolism. I think that it's all very relevant. I find it very hard to say we should all be doing one thing or another. We need good biochemistry that's focused on the fundamental issues that underscore cancers. We need genetics, we need immunology, we need to understand the metabolism. That it's for, let me just tell you a story. And it's a patient story, even though it's a basic science question. Mm-hmm. So we brought an advocate to our laboratory retreat last year, and she shared her story. And the turning point for her as a patient was not a drug. It was a combination of her histology and the genetics that changed the course of her treatment. And that's the kind of work that my students in the laboratory did every day. And so could really see how it was that, what they were studying, very basic signaling, very basic genetics, and not simple, just, fundamental building blocks of life kind of basic. This is how we can't do this unless we can understand cancers. So I can't tell you exactly what proportion we should share one way or another, but basic science is foundational.
Great, thank you. We us at Research to America, we always try to show the pipeline from basic research to all the way to the patient. So that's great. For our next question in the chat here, would you, Dr. Rathmell, like to highlight any accelerating medicine partnerships with industry and NCI organized with the Foundation for the NIH?
So we're working a lot. I mean, I won't give a narrow example, but really trying to understand across clinical trials what things that we can learn, particularly across immunotherapy trials, but also targeted therapy trials. And that takes cooperation across multiple private partners. And we've been working with the FNIH to try to make that a reality. So we're really excited. This is back to, you can learn more from data when you have a lot of data and when you have a lot of inputs. And so that's one way that we'll be able to more rapidly advance some of the work that we do.
Wonderful, thank you. On to our next question. Dr. Rathmell, could you share examples of current research investments by the NCI that have the potential to generate significant public interest and support, ultimately leading to increased funding and accelerated development of promising ideas?
Yeah, I find this kind of question is always like the hardest one because, it's hard to pick what is the most exciting or what is most pivotal, because there's a lot that's very exciting. So when I give you a couple of answers, know that there are 10 others that I could have picked, and sometimes they're top of mind because of a paper that I just read or someone I just talked to. But I can't answer a question like that without saying CAR T cells, or I'll just say cellular-based therapy. That is really showing us ways that we can harness the immune system, and we're making major investments in work to know how we do this best, how we get it into the hands of patients, what are ways that we get to more solid tumors. That's just and that's a great area for public-private partnership as well, because there's lots of industry interest in that area as well. So, but I think, some of this is where it's hard to pick. I'll go with metabolism for just a minute. I actually think some of our investments in understanding how metabolism is influenced in response to different therapies, in how some tumors respond and some others don't. I think this getting back to really understanding basics. We all learned the Krebs cycle, and we all learned, how oxidative phosphorylation works. It turns out it's actually much more complicated than that, in ways that we can possibly manipulate, but in ways that really influence the way different tumors work. So, but our investments are for the amount of money that we get. To be honest, $7 billion is a lot of money, but we spread it in so many different directions, and I am so enthusiastic about all of them. I'm really excited about engineering. I'm really excited about data science. I'm really excited about, I get excited about everything. So.
Awesome. Great to hear about all the work you all are doing. So I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Thadhani for the remaining questions.
Sure. Well, really, Dr. Rathmell, I know we've grilled you a little bit here, but it's wonderful to hear your vision, to hear your plans. I want to come back to something again that you touched on at the beginning, which is your journey and physician scientists. I just remember in my class of residents when I was in Boston, I would imagine the same across the country, that really the best and the brightest often went into cancer and hematology and oncology, physician scientists, that is. It's tough in terms of funding, although 17% for a new investigator is certainly very attractive. Mm-hmm. But what advice do you have for young physician scientists interested in entering into the field these days, as far as the NCI can help or guide them in their journey?
Yeah, so that's a passion area of mine from my own time as a physician scientist. I mentioned before some of my training experience, and also when I was president of the ASCI, the American Society for Clinical Investigation. The need for physician scientists has never been greater, and yet there's so many demands on them, and forces that can push people toward more clinical work or toward abandoning the clinical side. I really think speaking the language of both is very, very important. I had the opportunity to spend some time at the National MD PhD meeting in Colorado earlier this month, a meeting I'd been to before when I was working with the MD PhD program. First of all, I love that meeting because you get all of these physician scientists across the span of their medical training. So some of them just getting started in their medical school, some deep in their graduate training, some on the cusp of planning their residency, and really hearing from them and helping to demystify some of the challenges that are in the way. The tips that I gave them were one, to stay focused on what they think is the most important question, and that's not to stay narrow. If the question is really important, bring in whatever it is that you need to be able to address that question. That's some of the questions that we tackle as physician scientists really need people who know the experience of the clinic and know the biology behind it to be able to make that move forward. The other advice that I gave them was to surround themselves with really good people, supportive people, but people who are going to challenge them as well. And that the people around you is really what's most important to your success. I also challenge them to say yes more than no. And that is, not to be at your own detriment, and only to say yes, in fact, when you can deliver. But that I think there's a little bit of a culture coming out of saying, it's important to say no. Sometimes it is important to say no, but sometimes saying yes can surprise you with how an opportunity that you didn't expect can really change your course or make you think a little bit differently. And then I asked them to ask a lot of questions, always ask more questions. I've found throughout my career that just asking questions can be really, really valuable. And finally, to celebrate So find joy in what they're doing and celebrate, small and big wins. So, talking to these young people, the ideas, the energy, the way that they can be, creative and innovative is just inspiring. We need them in the field. And so, I think this is the best career. I'm, of course, drank that Kool-Aid a long time ago. I think that there's a place for physician scientists. I do believe cancer is a great place for them to be.
Yeah, it certainly always has been. I think certainly in my lifetime, just to see that, and just to maybe end up with one quick point or question that has come up in the chat that's relevant to what you just said, was a medical student highlighting or asking the question, what does the field of surgical oncology look like? And since it came from a medical student, I just feel obligated to asking you the question. And of course, knowing Monica's phenotype, as you alluded to,
Yep.
What does that look like moving forward? And then we'll come to a close.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'll just share, one of my students that I've been just so proud of, one of my very first MD PhD students. Actually, she came to me as an undergraduate to work, then worked for me as a technician, and then came back to do her PhD with me, MD PhD, and then went off to be a urologist and is now starting her own laboratory. And will be a surgeon scientist focusing on bladder cancer. And I could not be more proud. So, and I've mentored a number of surgeon scientists in this career. I think there's a strong tradition in internal medicine and medical-based specialties, but in the surgical specialties, you see the tumor. You get to see the cancer in a way that a medical oncologist never ever can. And some of the questions that you can address are really unique. I think that there are real challenges around reimbursement models, and I think it's different when you do work that requires muscle memory versus medical oncology, where we can just Google and learn a little bit from books on the fly. It's a little different than when you're right there in the OR, but the advantages are tremendous. So I actually I encourage young people to go into surgical or other procedural based research specialties, eyes wide open, knowing what it is that they're getting into, but knowing that they have real potential.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Monica would like that answer, and I appreciate that. Let me thank certainly the audience and the individuals who submitted questions, and just happy that we're able to come together with a really inspiring leader like Dr. Rathmell. Before I thank her, I just want to remind everyone the next Alliance discussion is Wednesday, July the 31st at 11:30, and we'll have yet another leader now talking about H5N1, given it's making its way through this country. And we have Dr. Jennifer Nuzzo from the Pandemic Center at Brown University, and I think Jacqueline has just put the link there for anyone who wants to copy it. But that said, Dr. Rathmell, really appreciate your time, appreciate your passion, and so thankful that you're in this role, and could not be happier about your leadership, your vision, your passion, and we certainly look forward to hearing from you in the coming years and helping execute the vision that you've painted. So appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everything that you're doing as well.
Great. I want to thank Research America as well, and the people that made this possible. And have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Alliance meeting. Thank you.